Today let's talk about starting a new force of Plague Marines to spread death and despair amongst the galaxy of the 41st millennium. Hello and welcome back to Auspex Tactics, where today we're continuing our Death Guard series and talking through a few ideas for how to start a new army starting from a standing start. I'm sure plenty of people will have been newly drawn to the legions of Nurgle, following a few new model releases and of course this shiny new codex, which at first glance is certainly looking very strong. In this video we'll talk about why you might want to start collecting a Death Guard army, planning out the project, first steps with kits, and then expanding the army to the next level. If you're a Death Guard veteran and you can think of any tips or tricks that I missed that might help new players, please let us know down in the comments. So to start out, why would you want to collect a Death Guard army? As I'm sure most of you are aware, the Death Guard are the Plague Marines of Nurgle, one of the traitor Chaos Space Marines that rose up against the Emperor during the cataclysmic events of the Horus Heresy. As Mortarion led his forces back to aid the Siege of Terror, the ships of the Death Guard Legion lay becalmed in the warp, with devastating plagues overwhelming even the superhuman Space Marine biology. Mortarion, the Primarch of the Death Guard, was forced to strike a deal with Nurgle to preserve his legion's existence, pledging fealty to the god of death, despair, and plagues in exchange for his legion's existence. The Death Guard emerged from these ships as Plague Marines in permanent semi-death, their bloated flesh twisted and distorted, but gifted with unnatural resilience and almost impossible to kill. In the 41st millennium, Death Guard make war not just with conventional weapons, but all manner of diseased and plague combat weapons, disgusting demon engines that spread contamination everywhere, and often accompanied by hordes of poxwalker zombies. Truly a foe that few armies would want to fight against. In terms of models, they're a relatively new faction release for Warhammer 40k. They used to be part of Codex Chaos Space Marines, but at the start of 8th edition were granted their own codex and an entire massive release of different models. It means that compared with most factions, their sculpts are incredibly nice and very new, absolutely overflowing with disgusting details, and they certainly have a lot of character on the battlefield. Gameplay wise, as you'd expect, Death Guard tend to be quite slow but incredibly durable, and their game plan is typically to grind their opponent down over the course of a long game, rather than being excessively hard hitting on the damage dealing front. Their disgustingly resilient rule means that they're exceptionally hardy to enemy attacks, subtracting 1 from the damage characteristic of all enemy weapons, and to deal damage in return, they have plague weapons everywhere. These have increased chance of wounding the foe, and they have contagions of Nurgle to reduce the enemy toughness when they're near them. They also have lots of ways of dealing mortal wounds via various plague auras where the enemy starts to die if they get too close. You can build an army with them either around their core Plague Marines, or go very heavy on either Demon Engines, Terminators, or have a hefty contingent of Poxwalker Zombies. In terms of power level, right now in 40k, I'd say they're really quite strong. Their codex has come out quite recently at time of recording, so we don't really know exactly how well they'll be performing in tournaments, but just from the face of it, they are looking very, very strong, with certain units such as their Terminators and Mortarion being very hard for the opponent to deal with. Price-wise, as a faction to collect, I'd say they're fairly moderate for 40k. As new kits, some of them can be fairly expensive, but Death Guard are quite an elite faction, meaning that you won't need quite as many models as some other armies to play them on the tabletop. So there are some reasons to collect Death Guard. Now let's talk about planning a collection. As always, there's quite a lot of places that you can find out more about a faction before actually diving in. You can experiment with some army list building on that Warhammer app, Warhapedia, or Battlescribe, and you could potentially try out some of their units in-game on Tabletop Simulator before actually jumping into a collection. There's plenty of places online that you can find like-minded players who do play Death Guard. If you use Facebook, then the Death Guard Facebook group is particularly good. Plenty of inspiration there, particularly from a modelling and painting point of view. Initially, I'd try and think of a small force that you want to play at something like a 500 point level or 25 power level, and acquire the forces that you need for that so you can actually get some games in. In the meantime, if you are wanting to do a bit more forward prep, you could think about a potential 2000 points list that you might want to build towards, just to give yourself some sort of goal that you're aiming for, though I would accept that it might change further down the line as you become more experienced with the army. You can consider how you're going to paint the models. Traditionally, Death Guard are painted in this pallid green sort of colour, as you can see on the right, though there's absolutely nothing to stop you making your own take on this, giving it a different sort of feel, or maybe even just changing the colour scheme up entirely if you fancy having a different colour for your warband. You can think about what plague company you might want to represent in the lore, and some of these can also have some powerful effects in-game as well. Which army archetype you're wanting to build towards, whether you're wanting lots of demon engines, lots of terminators, or to max out on the zombies as much as possible. And also if you're going to be trying to play a bit more of a ranged or shooty game with the Death Guard, though I would say that I think the strongest Death Guard armies will do a bit of both. From there, after you've done a bit of planning, you can think about the first steps for getting an army together. For rules, I would pick up Codex Death Guard. You don't really need much more than that. You could think about those data cards if you wanted to have the stratagems handy, but for me personally, I get by just fine using the books. For your first force to fielding games, I would focus on core units, things like Plague Marines for the troops, and an HQ choice or two, so you can actually field some proper detachments. And then anything that you find just really cool, you really want to include in the army, and something that's really drawn you to Death Guard. Maybe you just love the idea of those bloat drones with the flesh mowers, charging about killing loads of enemy troopers, or maybe you want the core of your force built around a huge unit of Blight Lord Terminators, to put loads of stacked buffs on them and make them a really hard to deal with unit. It's always good for the motivation to get a few things that really inspire you, as well as the things that in theory you should be getting. As is always with starting a new army in 40k, it's worth bearing in mind the discount deals that you have available, and at time of recording, the Death Guard have just got this Combat Patrol box for £85 or $140, giving a pretty decent discount on the kits within. I will say that this Combat Patrol box is a slightly unusual one, to be honest. In it you get Typhus, one of the special characters for the Death Guard, a Biologous Putrefier, a support character who's good with Plague Marines, 7 Death Guard Plague Marines who are a really good core unit for the army, and then the rest of the box goes absolutely mad with Poxwalkers. You get no less than 30 of the things. Typhus has some good synergy with the Poxwalkers within his Plague Company, so it's not really a bad one if you want to play the Harbingers. I'm not going to lie though, it's hardly your traditional Death Guard force. I think it might have been a slightly better box if they'd subbed out a fair few Poxwalkers for something like a Bloat Drone or a Blight Hauler. I would bear in mind that you can't actually legally field this as a detachment as per the Death Guard Codex. There's a restriction on Poxwalker units, meaning that you can only take as many of them as you have core Death Guard infantry units. So to actually field all the models in this box, you would need to pick up another box of Plague Marines or Terminators or something. For me though, I wouldn't let that worry you too much. It is still a fairly decent deal for the models within, and I'd say that Poxwalkers really are a valuable asset right now. They don't really do much offensively, but they're incredibly tough, and to have 30 of them sitting around on objectives while the rest of the army goes after the enemy army is a good way to help you win games. For me, if I was starting out Death Guard right now, I would pick up one of these, but I wouldn't get more than one. It certainly gives you a decent amount of points of Death Guard for a fairly cheap price. Just in general, when buying 40k miniatures, there are a few general things that I would bear in mind. Firstly, things tend to be cheaper through discount retailers than through Games Workshop themselves, so if you do have them available, I'd most certainly make use of them. In the UK, Element Games is a good one. They give you 10 to 20% off Games Workshop miniatures, and there's a link to them down in the video description below. Anything you do buy through them does help support Auspex Tactics, so there's that as well. In addition, you can think about buying things second hand if you are on a budget. There are a decent amount of Death Guard that tend to crop up on eBay at the moment, as quite a lot of people started the faction in 8th edition when they came out in the starter sets. It just meant that they were a really cheap army to get into in 8th edition, so there really are quite a lot of models kicking around for them. If you can find any of the old box sets, such as No Fear or Dark Imperium, they will typically be very good deals if you can get them for anywhere near the price that they were selling for in 8th. They're really good boxes for starting Death Guard, with some Plague Marines, a Bloat Drone, a Lord of Contagion, and a few Poxwalkers. Generally when I buy 40k miniatures, I like to buy them in small jumps, getting no more than 1 or 2 kits at a time, and trying to get them at least somewhat assembled and painted before I move on to the next ones. Typically I wouldn't buy an entire 2,000 point army at one go, unless I was very experienced with the hobby already. You just give yourself the chance of making mistakes, or perhaps overloading yourself with miniatures to build, and risking losing a bit of motivation. Finally, I would remember that the rules can and do change regularly. Most of the Death Guard stuff should be set for a while now, unless Games Workshop tries to make any balance adjustments, just in case they feel they've made Mortarion too strong or something. So it's worth buying things that you actually like for other reasons than just the rules, as these will certainly change whenever they get a new codex, and points might change even before then. So after you've established a core, there's quite a few routes that you can take for expanding the army forwards, and after you have some troops and HQs down, I'd typically focus on trying to take a few more hard-hitting damage-dealing units, ones that are going to give your opponents problems. From a Demon Engine point of view, it's worth noting that the Blight Haulers are really good value in terms of the amount of money spent for the amount of points that you get in-game. They cost almost as much as a Plague Burst Crawler now, what with the multi-melter upgrade and also their accuracy, but they're still sold as really quite a cheap easy build kit for only £15 for a Demon Engine. Otherwise, all the other options are pretty decent. Plague Burst Crawlers remain very strong and additionally accurate with the new codex, and Defilers and Bloat Drones seem very solid as well, I particularly like the look of the blow drones with the flesh mowers. I'd also very strongly consider some Terminators in a Death Guard army. They're perhaps the ideal linchpin unit to build your army around, being absolutely monstrously tough with a toughness of 5, a 2+ armor save, and a 4+ invul. They deal decent damage in melee, and a big unit of them can be one of the ideal choices for things like stratagems or to put psychic buffs on them like -1 to hit. Mortarion might just be one of the standout units of the Death Guard Codex. He's a little bit on the pricey side at £90 or $140, but he will cover really quite a big chunk of points out of the Death Guard army. He does cost almost 500 points in game. Unless Games Workshop balance adjusts him at some point, I think he's a fairly decent pickup. Again, absolutely monstrously tough, and he'll kill just about anything that he reaches in melee. If your opponent wants to take him down, they're going to have to focus pretty much all their firepower on him for a couple of turns, hopefully leaving the rest of your army to run amok. Death Guard have quite a lot of characters between their Plague Casters, featured Virion buff units, and various Lord characters. I would always remember that Space Marines can be quite easily kit bashed, as I'd say quite a lot of these models are really quite pricey just for one figure, and they're not really all that different in appearance to standard Plague Marines. If price is an issue, then I'm sure a lot of them can be quite well replicated with standard Plague Marines, a few additions from a bits box, and a little bit of ingenuity. A few of them can be bought a little bit cheaper perhaps with this Chosen of Mortarion box. It's £37.50 or $60, so still isn't particularly cheap, but you do get a Plague Caster, a Blightbringer, and quite a cool Plague Marine Championer in the box, so it's not that bad a pickup. There are plenty of other units that you can expand to with Death Guard, though some of these would be the first ones that I'd think about. I would bear in mind that if you do want Lords of Contagion, they're currently missing in action. Games Workshop doesn't actually sell them anywhere. If you do want to field that choice in game, I'd think about maybe converting from Typhus, who is essentially a character Lord of Contagion in himself. I suspect that he'll be quite easy to pick up on eBay, as he does come as part of that Start Collecting Death Guard box, and a lot of people won't necessarily want duplicates of him. So anyway, I hope that some of that has helped with some thoughts as to how to start a Death Guard army. It certainly doesn't seem to be a bad time for it, what with the recent new codex and quite a lot of fun new rules. As I said before, if I have missed anything or there's any other good routes into the Death Guard, please let us know down in the comments. If you've enjoyed the video, then feel free to subscribe to Auspex Tactics, where we'll certainly be keeping a few videos for the Death Guard Codex coming over the next few weeks. I'm hoping to get into a few unit reviews as and when I get chance. Finally, if you would like to help support the channel, I would just like to mention that Element Games affiliate link that's down in the video description. If you were thinking about buying any Death Guard or anything else 40k for that matter, then feel free to head over to Element through that link. If you live in the UK, they can post you Warhammer at a decent discount, and if you buy anything through them at all, it does help to support Auspex Tactics and keep these videos coming. If you live in the USA or Canada, there is also an Amazon link down in the video description as well. That works in basically the same way. Basically click on that and buy anything at all through Amazon, and a small amount goes to help support the channel without costing you any more at all. Both of these can just be a way to help support the channel if you are enjoying the videos and we're going to buy something anyway. In any case, a massive thank you for listening, and I'll hope to see you guys next time.